Hi there, and welcome to the US Web Design System monthly call for July 2020. My name is Dan Williams, and I'm the USWDS product lead. Thanks for being here. We've got a great hour planned for you today. First, I'd like to mention that we're recording this monthly call, and as always, we post these recordings to YouTube. So turn off your video if you don't want even the slightest chance of your self, your face, your room being seen on the internet, on YouTube. We'll be posting links and references into the chat as we go along, and you all are encouraged to ask questions in the chat at any time. If any member of our team can answer your question in the chat, they'll do so. Otherwise, I'll do my best to hazard an answer at the end of the hour. Also, be sure to introduce yourself in the chat as well. It's nice to know who is here. And with that, let's get started. We've got a bunch of new work to introduce today. First, I'll show a couple of nice site launches, and then the screen fills with yellow text. I'm going to spend the rest of the hour, and the rest of the team here are going to spend the rest of the hour digging into USWDS 2.8.0 and the new features, functionality, and improvements we're introducing in this release. We've got 5 new components to demo and some updates to the Gov banner that you'll want to integrate into your sites as soon as possible. We will also want to leave plenty of time for Q&A, so let's not waste any time and get right into site launches. Today we've got 2 new sites that both happen to be related to financial services. First up, FDIC.gov, a USWDS site from the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation with an interesting, highly customized site powered by the design system and really uses a lot of USWDS utility classes. Interesting to see how FDIC was using utility classes to build their site. Next up, TSP.gov, an important one for any federal employee, the home of the Thrift Savings Plan, the retirement plan for feds, with a crisp new site that's also hosted with our GSA friends at Federalist. So pretty cool. Great work on both these sites, and keep them coming, everyone. I like to see them. Now, product updates. Today we've got a lot of them. And they're all in the newest USWDS release, USWDS 2.8.0. But before we get to some of the components and updates in this release, I'd like to highlight a few of the smaller but still significant features in it. The USWDS 2.8.0 starts to introduce improved support for dynamic color with SVG icons. This is a CSS-based technique that uses CSS mask to color an SVG icon on the fly, which is surprisingly difficult to do without including the complete SVG code in line in your HTML markup. It's practically impossible to style SVGs included by reference in, say, an object or an image element with external CSS. And so we're starting to use a technique that uses an SVG image as a mask to mimic the effect of a color SVG. And this mask technique allows us to ship only a couple of SVG sort of color variations, but allows projects to add color to the icon on the site with CSS. So like in this instance here, we're using, we can use CSS background color to effectively change the color of an SVG icon. This is a technique we're using both in our new banner markup and in the new breadcrumb component. Color SVGs will fall back to either white or black in IE 11, whichever has the appropriate contrast on the component's background. So while this isn't the appropriate technique for the most appropriate technique for every color SVG instance, we think it's promising and useful, and we'll be sort of experimenting a bit more with it in the future. A consequence of this is that it's more important than ever to use auto prefixer on your SAS or CSS code. This has always been a USWDS requirement, and it's the only way to assure proper cross-browser compatibility. But if you start to implement a new component or update like banner or breadcrumb, and you see colored rectangles instead of icons, check your auto prefixer settings. Auto prefixer is a relatively straightforward addition to most workflows. It's included in our USWDS gulp setup, and it's a simple gem plugin for native Jekyll workflows as well. So auto prefixer, it's always been sort of required, certainly highly recommended. Now, sort of more than ever, get that into your workflows. Somewhat relatedly, we're also introducing a few new link-related settings in USWDS 2.8. We've always included our standard link colors in the color settings, but in 2.8, we've added reverse link color settings as well to set link colors for any situation where the background color is darker than the text. These are theme link reverse color, theme link reverse hover color, and theme link reverse active color. These are the settings that you see here. And these are kind of what already was kind of hard-coded into the system, but now we sort of expose those colors as settings. And these new settings and the dynamic SVG color kind of come together in improved automatic color contrast setting and checking. In a few key components, the system will automatically attempt to set text and link colors based on the background color and display a human readable error at compile time if it can't generate a conformant color combination. This is something we're introducing in banner, breadcrumb, and buttons, the B components, and it works kind of like this. So each of these components has an explicit background color set in the component settings. If the text needs to be darker than the background, the system will apply ink colored text, the ink color token. It'll apply ink colored text and the default link colors from USWDS settings that we just saw. If the text needs to be lighter than the background, the system will apply white colored text and the reverse link colors. And in both cases, if there's a manual color value in the component settings, like sort of theme, banner text color, then it would choose that color instead, or theme banner link color, it would use that color instead. If the manual or default values fail AA contrast, the system will give an error message. So it tries to do a better job at adjusting to backgrounds and adjusting to the colors you've set either as system colors or as theme colors. So if you see color contrast error messages after you install 2.8.0, look in your settings. Since the link default color is primary, if your project defines its primary color with a system token of grade 50 or lower, the link builder will fail for the banner, which has a default background of grade 5. And if your project defines its primary color with a system token of grade 40 or lower, the link builder will fail for the breadcrumb, which has a default background of white. Actually, I think that's, it would be grade 50 or lower for, anyhow, I'll do the math later. But if you see some of these failures, check your settings in for color and bump things up by a grade if something is failing. You can always set a manual link color for both of these components or redefine your default link colors in the settings. So check those settings, particularly the new settings introduced in 2.8. I've outlined all of these new settings in the release notes on GitHub. So first component update I'd like to discuss is an update to Banner, sometimes known as the Gov Banner. Gov Banner, an official website of the United States government. Here's how you know that banner at the top of government sites. This is one of the most important components in the design system. The USA Gov team tested the banner on their site, and their testing found that the presence of the banner makes a difference to site users and improves trust in a site. And it's our responsibility to earn that trust every time with the best, sort of most accurate and trustworthy message about why to trust the identity of a site. Here's that slide. Banner has three sort of key responsibilities: to provide continuity between government sites, to reliably identify government sites, and to educate visitors about how and why to trust the identity of a government site. And it's to those ends that we update the banner's content periodically. Last time we updated this content was in 2017. And while these updates are something we do intentionally, they're not something we try to do frequently, as we value the sort of consistency and continuity of the message and the development time and hassle it can be to keep the message up to date. The internal and external feedback we've heard and collected about the banner text over the past couple of years has indicated a few clear priorities for this update. To be really as clear as possible that trustworthiness is based on the combination of an official top-level domain, TLD, like .gov or .mil, and a secure HTTPS connection. Second, that indicators of HTTPS may take a couple distinct forms. Browsers often hide or mask the HTTPS section of a URL in the browser bar, instead showing only like a lock. And this may change at some point in the future as well. And that each government TLD, .gov, and .mil has a specific usage and requirements. And we wanted to give an accurate description of what sites use each. And that simplicity and plain language, they always improve the message. This wasn't new, but it's sort of always an important thing to keep in mind. And to better support plain language and access to government information and services for people with limited English proficiency, we should develop official language support for other languages, starting with Spanish. And I just wanted to say thank you to our colleagues at CISA, DoD, USA Gov, and across GSA who helped us think through these priorities and write a stronger and clearer iteration of our banner text. And sort of, as it is so often in the USWDS community, it was really a pleasure drawing from the collective experience of our community to make a meaningful improvement. So as of today, we're encouraging you to update your site banners with the following content. Primary text in the closed banner, that sort of remains unchanged. An official website of the United States government, here's how you know. There's also a Spanish translation of that available at the banner component page on our website, which we'll link to in a moment. And then in the expanded banner, official websites use .gov. A .gov website belongs to an official government organization in the United States. Secure .gov websites use HTTPS. A lock, a little image of a lock, or HTTPS means you've safely connected to the .gov website. Share sensitive information only on official, secure websites. Short and sweet. And we're also providing this text in Spanish. And also with a small change with a .mil variant as well, to sort of explain that a .mil website belongs to an official US Department of Defense organization. And there's the .mil version in Spanish as well. So we know that just sort of announcing a change is only part of it. Rolling this change out across all the sites we support, and some we don't support really, is something we can't do on our own. We need your help to get the word out. If you use the banner, update your banner. Or get more information and let the right folks know that there's an update at the USWDS website, which happens to be down there. designsystem.digital.gov/components/banner. And if you integrate this content along with USWDS 2.8, there are a couple nice new settings for the banner as well. You can now, as I kind of alluded to earlier, you can set the background color and the link color directly in settings without fussing over overrides, which can be nice. So When do you use the banner? To identify as an official government site. Most government sites should use the banner. And when should you consider something else? If you don't use .gov or .mil as a TLD and HTTPS together. The banner text identifies these domains and HTTPS as indicators that a website is an official government website. Really use the banner only if your site uses both of these things. I think while the message is the same and is consistent, it's best if you use it on a site that actually demonstrates usage. And don't use it anytime it would be sort of weird or misleading. The banner should be used to reduce confusion. So avoid using it on a site that's meant like only for testing or otherwise not meant to be identified as an official government website. And that's it for the banner. Next, I'd like to introduce some of the new components in USWDS 2.8.0, starting with Breadcrumb. A way to provide secondary navigation to help users understand where they are on a website. And for this, I'd like to introduce James Mejia, a contractor on the USWDS core team. James will show you a bit about how the breadcrumb works, how you can best use it in your projects, and how you can use the breadcrumb to improve SEO with richer search results. James.
You, Dan. I'm excited to be back to show you guys Breadcrumb. Can you see my screen, Firefox?
Yes, I can.
Awesome, thank you. So Breadcrumb is a series of links that show the hierarchical relationship between the page you're on and where it lives in the overall site structure. It's a good way to orient users who might have landed on the page from search or an outside link. It's also useful on sites where the hierarchy isn't immediately obvious. So for example, you wouldn't use this on a landing page or a simple site with just a few pages. On small screens, we show a link to the parent of the current page. And at wider widths, we'll show the full breadcrumb trail with truncation. The page titles should match the items in the breadcrumb. This latest release provides a smart way of easily creating accessible links on any background. As Dan mentioned earlier, if you use default link color in the breadcrumb settings, the system will pick the default link color, the proper standard or reverse link color based on the value you set in theme breadcrumb background color. If you want a custom link color in the breadcrumb, you can set that with theme breadcrumb link color. And the system will automatically build the hover, visited, and active states and check these for the right contrast. You can also update the breakpoint at which we display the full breadcrumb trail with theme breadcrumb min width. Check out the documentation on the site for the full list of available settings. As you can see, we also support a wrapped breadcrumb variation. If you find that your breadcrumbs are truncating the current page past the point of usability, but long breadcrumb trails can be a usability issue of their own and could be a sign that you might want to flatten the information architecture of your site. Lastly, we have the RDFA variation. Breadcrumbs can really help search engine optimization, or SEO for short. When you use proper breadcrumb metadata, search engines display richer results for your web pages. This helps people more easily find your content when they search for it. You can provide this breadcrumb metadata in a few ways. Search engines recommend using JSON LD in the document head, but if you don't use JSON LD, we provided an alternative breadcrumb template that uses RDFA attributes for metadata. You can see it's just like the default breadcrumb, but when you inspect it, you'll see the metadata attached in the markup. So either way you implement the breadcrumb, make sure you include this metadata. You can find more information on the breadcrumbs component page. Also join the Slack channel or create an issue on GitHub if you have feedback or run into any bugs. We'll post the Slack and GitHub links at the end of the call. That's it. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you, James. Yep. You can find our breadcrumb component guidance and code at designsystem.digital.gov/components/breadcrumb. So when do you use breadcrumb? When orientation matters. Breadcrumbs show where the current page is located in the website hierarchy. You should use a breadcrumb or a breadcrumb trail, breadcrumb bar, however you sort of say it to yourself, when it's likely that a user will arrive at an interior page or search will arrive at an interior page from search or from an outside link. If your site has a lot of hierarchical depth, it's important to use a breadcrumb to really convey to someone landing on a page where they are on your site. You want to use a breadcrumb to facilitate navigation. Breadcrumbs make it easier to understand complex sites. Use them to reinforce your site structure. And when should you consider something else? As James said, on simple sites, if the website's not very deep, it's only a couple levels deep, and the context for the current page is really clear from the main navigation, breadcrumb might be kind of redundant. On landing pages, omit breadcrumbs on the home page of a site, and breadcrumbs could also be omitted from section landing pages as well, sort of the second level. Breadcrumbs are really most useful when the hierarchy is not immediately apparent from the main navigation. You could consider not using a breadcrumb if there's redundant side navigation. And side navigation is used in combination with the main navigation, might be redundant. And don't use a breadcrumb for something like a step-by-step process. A step-by-step process is like a linear relationship of one thing and then the next thing and then the other thing. Breadcrumb should be used for hierarchical relationships, not linear ones. So that is it for breadcrumb. And next up is date picker and date range picker, a couple of our most requested components. These and the form-related components we'll see later are part of a larger package of advanced form components that we're developing through a partnership with GSA's 10X program. We've been able to develop a number of important components through this program, and we'll see some of that work today, and there's still more to come. So to walk us through date picker and date range picker, I'd like to introduce William Bagayoko, contractor with the 10X Advanced Forms team. Take it away, William.
Thanks, Dan. So let me share my screen. Let's see. So let's jump into the new date picker component. The date picker is a tool to assist in the selection of a date and is most helpful when the context of a calendar is needed. So to show what's available, there are a list of examples I'm going to go through that highlight some of the functionality present in this release. So the first thing we can highlight is the date format hint that we have with all of the examples. Right now, the date format externally is month/day/year. This would be the date that they would type and would see the feedback for in the input. But internally, in terms of some of the data attributes we're going to be going through and the actual date that would be submitted from the date picker component is going to be the ISO 8601 standard, which is year-day-month. And we'll see that later once we start submitting from this form. So there is progressive enhancement. If I were to turn off JavaScript, you would see plain text inputs with no button if you were to refresh the page. So basically these are mostly inputs. They could be input of type date, but that's not necessarily a requirement for the enhancement to take place. So that's a part of what's being delivered. Now the enhanced date picker also adds validation to the inputs regardless of whether the date picker is actually used. So if we typed in an imaginary date, we should get an error. Let's try 1/34/2020, press enter, and an error pops up that says it should be a valid date. If we were to replace that and use dashes instead of slashes, we would still get a validation error. And if we were to submit with a correctly formatted date, we should get a correct submission. And as we see, the date format is year-month-day, which is the ISO 8601 format. So as we open the date picker, we can see, okay. As we open the date picker, we can see that it automatically moves focus to the default date. That was an issue with the SVGs showing up. So that could be specified by either the previous selected date, or there is an attribute called default date that could be specified. But obviously the default would be today's date if nothing else was declared. So if we hover on a current date or any date within the current month, we'll see that the focused date actually updates. And if we shift to using the keyboard, we can see some of the accessibility work that's been done. There is an announcement that occurs when the date picker is initially opened in screen readers, and that would announce that you can use left and right to navigate by day, up and down to navigate by month, and that could lead to you navigating into new months, home and in to go to the beginning and end of a week, page up, page down to navigate by month, and shift page up, page down to navigate by year. So, and to select a date, you would press enter or space. Now, we also have a month and view selection screen, which we would generally expect to be primarily utilized by those using a mouse. But at the same time, it's accessible by keyboard. So you can go in and select a different month. We can select December and also select a different year. And yeah, and the tab circulates within the component to give them access not only to the month and year selection screens, but also the navigation buttons by month and year that are in this top bar of the calendar. So if we can navigate back to, let's see if I can find the date that I just selected. Okay, so, and you can use escape to close the date picker without selection. So let's say that you wanted only to allow dates within the next 2 months from today. That is possible using the data attributes that you can set within the component. So right now you would have to specifically declare that date in the ISO 8601 format. There's no fuzzy option for today or 2 months. So through JavaScript or server-side, the server-side generation process, you would need to add those dates. But as we open up the screen, we would see that the navigation buttons to go back are not visible, and that the dates before today's date are not selectable. We can go into the month selection screen, and only the months where there is an available selection are selectable. And obviously there's only 1 year, so you can only reselect the year of 2020. So we can select this max date that was specified, and also as soon as you have these parameters, if you were to select a date that was outside of the range and attempt to submit it, you would end up with a validation error. So that would be present as well. So I'm going to select a valid date, and then we can move on to the next example. So now there could be a situation where you wanted to show a range of dates. Let's say a library wants to know the return date of an item with the context of when the item was initially checked out. So in this specific situation, we have a range date that you can declare, which was set to July the 10th. And at that point, it shows the relationship of the number of days that have spanned from that date that was declared. And as you move your mouse around and it focuses a new date, it will update that, that range. Now, there's also the min date validation added to this example to prevent you from going back from yesterday, since you couldn't have returned it before yesterday. And outside of this visual cue, it operates the same as other date picker implementations with the min date validation, etc. So we can move into theming. And this component is built using BIM styles so that you can customize the project or customize this component for your project. In this example, we have a couple of adjustments that could be made based off of your project's needs, similar to having a subtle margin and a box shadow, highlighting or using a different text color on the side of for the weekend days to designate either a closure or something being unavailable, and also a style for today's date, which is a class that is within the date picker, which leads to the date range picker, which is an additional component that manages 2 date picker instances to help with the selection of a range of dates. So if we open both the inputs currently, they would seem the same as other date picker implementations. And at that point, we can select a date. And if we open the end range, we'll see that not only is it declare a range date for this second date, but it also added the min date validation and provided a default date so that it didn't just go to today's date. So I can open that up again and show that it doesn't default to today's date where it generally would have. So at that point, we can select a date within the end range and open up the start date range. And you can select a new date with the min date valid or the max date validation now present and showing the range that had currently been selected. And if you were to select that date, it updates in the previous, the other range component. So that concludes the demo of the date range picker. Now, we'd also like to say thanks to those that offered feedback and did some usability testing. We were able to resolve some issues like a date selection quirk on some mobile devices and identify the need to provide a theming hook for today's date, since it was a common need. There could be many additions that could be made, and your feedback is going to be really important to shape the future of these components. Thanks for your time, and we look forward to hearing about you using these components in your projects and hearing your feedback. Back to you, Dan.
Thanks, William. There's a ton going on in the date picker and the date range picker, and thanks for walking us through so much of it. I appreciate it. I'll jump back into my slides and talk a little bit about when to use the date or range picker, when to use them, scheduling, when you need to schedule or record an event, and when that benefits from the context of a calendar. Use it when the day of the week is important, when knowing that day of the week helps users choose a specific date. And when should you consider something else? If you're asking for a familiar date, if you're asking users for a date that they really know well or can look up without using a calendar, like a birthday, use date input fields instead. Or if the day of the week is kind of irrelevant, if that context is irrelevant, if there's no benefit to knowing the day of the week, you might consider date input fields instead. But the date range picker and the date picker are a great addition to the design system. Next, we'll look at file input. File input allows users to attach one or multiple files to a form. And to walk us through this component, I'd like to introduce Jared Cunha, contractor with the 10X Advanced Forms team. Jared.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Jared Cunha, and I'm going to talk about the file input. So Um, the file input that we built for the US web design system is a progressive enhancement to the regular native HTML file input. So underneath the presentation layer, you still have a standard file input. We've added a few design and usability improvements to it, but the functionality is ultimately the same. And there were several reasons why we decided on this approach. The first is that the US web design system kind of aims to be agnostic towards technology stack. So we didn't want to build a component that only works in single page applications, or something that requires, that can only be used where you have asynchronous uploading. This is to attach a file just as you would a regular file input. And then another reason is also accessibility. So screen readers are going to read the USWDS file input just like a regular file input. And it's also keyboard focusable. We kept the number of modifications to its behavior low because the more modifications you tend to make to native form controls, the greater the potential you have to introduce accessibility or usability issues, or it might not work in all web browsers. So because it uses the standard file input as its foundation, I kind of wanted to show the two file inputs. So, we can show a comparison between how they work. Now you can't really see my file browser window, but I'm going to just drag a single file over to the standard file input here. And as you can see, it shows the file name. I'm going to do the same thing over to the USWDS file input. And you can see we have maybe you can see it. There's a hover state, and then it shows a thumbnail preview with the file name. There's also a clear affordance if you would like to change that file. So the USWDS file input, it's still going to have some of the same quirks that a standard file input is going to have. For example, the drag and drop functionality for the file input is not supported in IE or some older versions of Edge. So in that case, we've changed some of the text affordances here. But I think where we have a bigger difference is with when you're attaching multiple files. So if I were to select a bunch of different files and drag them and place them on the, I did not get multiple files that time, and place them on a regular file input, you can see that it has 6 files selected, but it doesn't really tell me which files I've actually selected here. I can hover over it and get the file name in this rather small tooltip. But when you select multiple files and drag them to this input, you can see all of the thumbnails. For some of the files that take a little while, if they're a larger file, it might take a little bit longer to generate that thumbnail. And there shows it displays a loading image before it displays the thumbnail. And then if you run into a scenario where it's unable to generate a thumbnail, we have these placeholder images. So there are placeholder images for PDFs, spreadsheets, documents, movies, and then there's also just a generic catch-all file input. File icon. So just a note about using the multiple file input is that if you're using iOS, you are allowed to attach multiple files to an input, but any other type of file, it uses a different system for attaching those files, and you're only able to select one out at a time. So depending on the type of documents that you're requesting, or if there's a chance that your users might be interacting with this application on a mobile device, you might want to consider using separate file inputs instead. The file input also supports the accept attribute. So with a standard file input, or actually for both, you won't be able to see this, but when you click on the input, you'll get a file browser window, and it will only display the valid files. So any file that's not accepted is going to be grayed out, and you're going to be unable to select them. However, if you are dragging those files will actually all be attached to that. And I know this hint here says any file type, but we've restricted this to be only PDF files. But as you can see, I've attached some JPEGs in there as well as PDFs. With the USWDS file input, if any file is not accepted, you get an error message that tells you to only attach whatever file it's requesting. So if I were to change that and attach only PDF files and drop that in, now we can see that we have the correct files here. So invoking the file input is relatively straightforward. What you do is you just apply a class name of USA file input to an input type file. USA file input is space. It's the words are spaced by hyphens, and then JavaScript is going to generate the rest of the child elements. And that is it for file input.
Cool. Thank you, Jared. Jump back in here and just say that when do you use a file input? You use it when documents are required. Ask users to provide files when it's necessary. And when should you consider something else? If documents are optional, you might want to consider avoiding asking a user to provide a document that you don't actually need. If you're asking for large files, be mindful that some users might have limitations on their connectivity or on the data plans. And if you really need something like asynchronous upload, the file input doesn't support asynchronous upload, as Jared said, like a little progress bar or something like that. Files are part of the form's complete post, only on the form submission. And last but not least for the components is Tooltip. Tooltip is a short descriptive message that appears when a user hovers or focuses on an element. And to demonstrate Tooltip, I will return to our friend Jared. I'd like to welcome him back. Hey, Jared.
Hello. Okay. All right.
Let's do it again.
So let's do it again. All right. So this is a Tooltip. Tooltips are short descriptive messages that appear when hovering or focusing over an element. So the USWDS tooltip, it's to be used for helpful non-critical information that can help or enhance certainty about a particular interaction. The descriptions should be brief. And actually, you should probably try to even avoid using them whenever possible. Information is always best kept in view and not hidden behind interactions. But many of us have worked on some very information-dense screens where space comes at a premium. And tooltips can be very helpful if we're looking to reduce the cognitive load when used appropriately. So for this example, I have just a fake messages inbox. And when I hover over each of these messages, you can see some icons that might perform some kind of an action. Well, it's generally a best practice to use both a combination of icons and text. Here, those labels might overwhelm the space, and the sender, the subject, and the date can end up getting lost with all of the different action items for each of these messages. So there's a trash can icon, and you might assume that that is a delete button. And when I hover over that, see that we can trash the message. And that's kind of what I mean when I said that the tooltips are meant to enhance confidence about a particular interaction. So we designed the tooltips to remain on a single line, only support plain text, and only appear on hover or focus. The USWDS tooltip, it's an example, or it's an enhancement on the title attribute, and we kind of intentionally limited their scope to ensure that tooltips work well with screen readers and as well as keyboard navigation. The tooltip can be positioned to the using data attributes. It can be positioned to the top, left, right, bottom of the element. And if the tooltip ends up getting clipped, it's just going to shift to the opposite side. So I know this isn't probably, you could easily fit the text here, but in this instance, I just wanted to demonstrate that as the screen narrows, the tooltip is going to shift to the opposite side. Now, if it's still clipped, if we make this really narrow, it appears on top of the element, and then if it's still clipped, that's where we wrap it to multiple lines, and that's the only case where we allow the tooltip to wrap. So tooltips can be a little tricky because they have the potential to inherit certain styles, such as text alignment or anything else that could possibly mess up either the positioning of the tooltip itself or the triggering element. So the element that wraps the tooltips is generated by JavaScript. So it's kind of difficult to apply styles to any of the generated content, unless if you want to use CSS. We did create a bit of a workaround for handling this. So let me see if I can easily switch windows here. I'm gonna stop my screen share and stop it again and start it again just to show the code that generates the tooltip. So we have the tooltip here. You invoke it by just applying the USA tooltip class name to any element. And then I have this data attribute here, data classes. And then you could apply any of USWDS utility classes or any additional classes that you want from your own design system to override or apply to the styles of the wrapping element. So I'm going to stop it again and just get back where we were. So if you are looking at the tooltip styles, it's they are placed on the wrapping element, and then this is the original triggering element, and what it does is it just moves the class name up to a newly generated parent. So that is it for tooltips.
Great, thank you, Jared. Jared, why did I say it so weird? Thank you, Jared. There's a question during that tooltip thing about whether the tooltip itself was selectable on mobile. And I don't believe the tooltip is selectable. It's triggered by an action on an element. It's not itself selectable. Is that correct? Or am I?
Yeah, the text within a tooltip, it's not selectable because as soon as you mouse off of it, it disappears.
Okay. Yep. Just wanted to be clear about that.
But you can trigger it on a mobile device.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. So when do you use the tooltip? For helpful non-critical information, when you want to enhance confidence, when you can do that with brief descriptions, or if you have a lack of space where space is at a premium. And when should you consider something other than a tooltip? If the information you're thinking of including is critical information, that should be on the page itself. If you have lengthy descriptions, the content really is kind of redundant. Or if you have sufficient space to include that in the main body of the content, you should do that instead of doing it in something like a tooltip. And finally, USWDS for designers. USWDS publishes Sketch and Adobe XD assets for prototyping and design phase work. The latest version of these assets brings them up to date with USWDS 2.8.0. To walk us through a couple nice things in these files, plus more about how we design our components in the open with feedback and usability testing drawn from the USWDS community, I'd like to welcome Ben Judy, contractor with the 10X Advanced Forms team. Ben.
Thank you, Dan. I am very pleased to show you these design assets in Sketch and XD. So let me start with Sketch. So here you should be able to see the new artboards for these new components that we just talked about. I'll kind of zoom in on them here. We have date picker with a few variations, including with and without hint text underneath the label. And then we also have the date range picker. And all of these components in both Sketch and XD, of course, are grouped so that they're very easy to select with one click. So if you were to grab the date range picker, you can just click on it, copy, and then paste into your own artboard in your mockups or prototypes. And we have file input, a few variations here to show one file attached or multiple files attached, just in case that's helpful in your mockups or prototypes. And then if we scoot over, as these are all in alphabetical order, we can go over to Tooltip. And you'll notice if we try to put a little bit of helpfulness into these. So if I change the override text on the tooltip and change the override feature in Sketch and make that label longer, it expands the width of the tooltip kind of the way you hope it would. So when it's pointing right, it grows to the left. The tooltip that's pointing to the left, it grows to the right. A subtle little thing, but can save a little bit of time for designers who are dropping these into their mockups. So I'll stop sharing from Sketch and I'm going to jump over to XD just to show you that one. So there again, we have the new artboards for date picker, just like in Sketch. And again, this is in Adobe XD. We have date range picker, and we have file input. And then fun fact, in Adobe XD, we have so many artboards now, we're exceeding the canvas width. So I think we've achieved a life goal there. So we had to wrap the artboards to a second row, but the tooltip artboard is here with those tooltips in XD. So those new design assets are available for you. And I want to kind of underscore and repeat something William mentioned earlier about the importance of feedback. And I'll give you just I know we're almost out of time. Very quickly, I'll give you a quick peek into how we've gathered some feedback from the community in the creation of these components. and to say thank you to everyone that participated. So a couple scrappy methods we use to just engage and get conversation going and to show our work in progress. We would put together these Google Docs, like here's one for file input, back when we were thinking of calling it file upload. And we included a preview to the work in progress and threw out some kind of prompts for, hey, what should we name this thing? And here are the different interactive states of that component. And you can see some comments that were left here by members of the user community. Same for date picker. We asked for feedback and got lots of great comments on that. Generated some really good discussion within the team on the best approach to these components. And then we also did some usability testing. I would call it semi-formal. Created a moderator's guide in a Google form that kind of could be used either to conduct moderated remote usability tests, or also had a lot of success just sending this form out to people and letting them kind of do a self-guided, unmoderated usability test, unmoderated in the sense that they could just walk themselves through the form, fill it out, and submit it. And then, here you can see just the raw input that we got from those usability tests. I know this is super exciting, a bunch of text in a spreadsheet, but really seriously, this was super helpful. And then we were able to kind of summarize what we learned and discuss that as a team. So, time doesn't permit me to thank every individual who gave us input on these components, but know that it is really appreciated. And we look forward to your continued input as we continue to work on more components. Back to you, Dan.
Great, thank you, Ben. I think we don't ever want to underestimate the value of text in a spreadsheet. That can be a powerful thing. And you can read more about the USWDS design assets that Ben mentioned and download the latest release at our USWDS for Designers repo. And thank you again to James, to William, Jared, and Ben. You've done great work getting these much needed components into the design system. Gratitude, and thanks for all the work that is involved in doing something like that. And there's still plenty more to come. You can check out our product roadmap at designsystem.digital.gov/about/product roadmap. And in the next major USWDS release, we expect to publish Time Picker, Progress Bar, and the Gov Anchor. I'll flip a little bit to the end here. I'll go back to Q&A, but I just want to say that in the next monthly call for August, monthly call, Saranda Silva from the IRS online service team will join me to help us understand UX debt. That'll be a good one, so I hope you're able to come to see that one. And as always, I encourage you to join the community in USWDS public Slack. Visit the Digitalgov to sign up for that sort of, to join us in that. Go to GitHub, all of those kinds of things. I know we're running super late. I'd like to spend, if I can, a couple moments for Q&A. So if I'm going to check out the chat and see if there's anything I can address in the chat. If you have any questions that you'd like me to answer, send it in the chat and we'll do our best to do that. If not, let's see. Here we go. We've got a bunch of things coming in here, and what do you think about breadcrumbs in applications? So I don't know, like in a native application for iOS or Android. I don't know enough to know enough about the best uses in that. I know that they can and are very useful for websites and potentially really good for web apps as well. So in general, more context tends to be better. So I would tend to err in the side of using breadcrumbs. A lot of people really like them, and they're proven to be very successful in orienting folks on site. So I would always try to use one before I assumed I didn't need to use one. with the breadcrumb, does the arrow reverse on mobile widths? Yep, points back backwards to the parent. Let's see, is the step-by-step component on the roadmap? It is. We're working on one that's currently, I think it's called Progress Bar right now. That may change, but that is something that we're actively developing right now. And if you check in USWDS public Slack, you can probably be an opportunity to do a little bit of feedback and usability testing with that component. Let's see. Where can we leave feedback? Best place to leave feedback is either in the USWDS public Slack, or the super best place to leave feedback is really on GitHub, on GitHub/USWDS/USWDS for the main code base. That is the most direct and actionable place to write an issue and leave feedback that gets in front of us and gets us working on something new. So look to GitHub to leave feedback. Let's see, how are the text input into tooltips? The tooltip is taken from the title attribute of an element. So the text in a tooltip is taken from that. If you set a title attribute on an element, that is pulled into any USA tooltip. Unless I'm describing that incorrectly, Jared, let me know if I did that wrong.
Oh, that was good.
All right, perfect. Still got it. Let's see. A general form question. A common thing I hear is that the forms look weird when the width doesn't fill up the whole page, even with the USA form large class. It's hard to say. Sometimes looking weird is a real can be a way of expressing a usability concern. I think in general, though, from an accessibility perspective, we try for the most part to have forms that tend to go as much as possible in the vertical direction only. Sometimes you can get away with a few things done with a little bit of horizontal and then vertical, but we like not to potentially hide form elements out on a wide part of a screen where perhaps someone with limited vision, and that exists, where you have a relatively constrained field of vision, might not know to go all the way to the side. We like to try to keep things vertical, though. If you're working smartly with a bit of you can have a little bit of horizontal rhythm, as long as you're sort of connecting horizontal items that make sense together, like first and last name. There may be some more that we can do around that, but I'd be happy to potentially dig more into it in the context of an issue if it's something that you might not technically be able to implement using the design system, but I hope that you would be. USWDS August meeting link is 404. It is probably not live yet. It makes sense that it isn't live yet because I haven't written the descriptive copy for it. So when we write that, it'll go live, and you will get a meeting through. You'll get an indicator through Eventbrite. So hang tight on that. We'll fix that link when I actually write it. And with that, we're only 5 minutes over, so I think we did pretty well on a very full day. So thank you again to everyone who presented here, and thank you very much for showing up today and taking a look at what we're doing and being part of a community that I very much appreciate. Thanks so much.